Good morning, friends. Today we're going to talk about the 3 most common issues you're going to find in a septic system. Most homeowners aren't going to be paying that much attention to their septic system until it comes time to sell the house or pull a permit to get something fixed on your house. Unless you work in this industry and see septic systems all day, every day, a lot of the nuance and the small things, as a homeowner, you're either not going to see, you're not going to know, or you're not going to be able to find out without the correct tool. During a real estate transaction, it's a regulated thing, at least in our state. Your state might be a little bit different. Leave a comment below. Tell me, is it regulated in your state? And if it's not, what do you think? Should it be? But in Maryland, it's a regulated thing. With that being said, a septic inspection has a set guideline of what you should be looking for and how you should do it. An example of this is going to be to check an outlet baffle. This is one of the most common problems that we find on the septic systems. Baffles are going to be in the front and the back of the tank. If you have a modern system, which is a 2-chamber system, you're going to see a baffle in the middle. A common septic system is just a big concrete box. It's a big rectangle. Usually it's 8 foot by 4 foot. Sometimes it's 10 by 5. You might get a weird circle one. You might get something that's a little bit different shape and size. It all depends on who makes the tank. In our area, though, they're usually rectangular. With that being said, you have your inlet line, which is going to be the pipe from the house to the tank. In front of there is going to be a baffle. The baffle on the inlet side of the tank is to slow everything down. It's basically to make it to where once you flush that toilet, it doesn't shoot across the tank and start stirring the soup. In the tank, you're going to have your 3 layers of separation. You got your scum up top, effluent in the middle, and you got your sludge at the bottom. The tank is your clarification chamber. What it's trying to do is it's trying to clarify everything. The reason it wants to clarify everything is so that way you get less debris going into your drain fields, which ultimately means you have a longer lasting septic system. I know, weird, right? That's why you want to pump it out every now and again. So the inlet baffles to slow everything down, so everything will kind of fall out of suspension and it'll separate out the correct way. The outlet side baffle on the back of the tank is designed to keep all the scum, which is the floating stuff, from getting into the outlet pipe to the drain field, distribution box, and causing problems. But again, remember, modern systems might have a center wall baffle. The reason that you would have a center wall baffle is that it basically creates 2 tanks in series. The reason that you would do this is no matter how good you take care of your system, no matter how much you pump your system, you're still going to get a little bit of debris that makes it out of the tank and into the absorption area. So by having that wall baffle in the middle, that little bit of debris is now going to go back into the second chamber and clarify again. So essentially, by putting that wall baffle, it keeps that little bit of debris in the back, and then a little bit of that little bit is what actually makes it out of the system. And that's why you can also put an effluent filter in the back of the tank to catch whatever that little bit of the little bit is. And the idea is that it should help to increase the longevity of the system, saving you tens of thousands of dollars. The wall baffle in the center of the tank functions very similar to the outlet side baffle. The only job is to mainly keep the scum, the floating stuff, from getting into the second chamber, because then it allows more debris into the system in total. Traditionally, a lot of these baffles were made when the tank was made, so they would be made out of concrete. Sewer gas is incredibly corrosive, and so what happens is the chemicals will react with the cement, and it kind of turns to mush, and eventually the baffle will fall off. In our state, the inlet baffle is not a requirement on an inspection. Now, it's a requirement on installation. I think that most inlet baffles cause a lot more headaches than they're worth. They usually cause a lot of clogs, especially if people are putting stuff down there like flushable wipes, feminine products, or even greases and stuff. Anything that kind of floats on top of the water, usually it's going to get stuck in that inlet baffle. So at least for an inspection, if the inlet baffle's missing, it is what it is. The outlet baffle missing, though, that is one of the most common problems that we're going to come across, and that's our first point. The outlet baffle, if it was made of concrete, is pretty much likely to fall off within 20 to 30 years of that tank being installed. Obviously, there are examples where those baffles will last a lot longer, and there's also examples of where those baffles will last not as long. This is why it's very important whenever you get the system pumped. Is the pumper looking in the tank? Does that baffle still exist? Is it still there? And what's the condition of that baffle look like? It's only a few $100s, unless your tank's like crazy deep, to get that baffle replaced. It's worth every penny to pay somebody to get that baffle installed so that way you don't have any problems in your drain fields. From there, now you're reliant upon somebody who has a camera. The next issue you're going to run across is sewer line problems, whether that's a belly, a crack, some roots, a partial clog. These are things that can happen over time or with a sloppy installation. So a clog obviously is where debris builds up, and it's most common when people are putting too much debris in at once. So like if you're just putting a bunch of toilet paper and you got a low flow toilet, obviously stuff's going to start building up in the pipe. Roots, if you plant a tree over top your septic system, you're probably going to get roots in your sewer line. Blows my mind how often people do that and then they're shocked that they have roots and the roots are causing problems. Cracks and separations. Now, this usually is going to be an installation error, but it can also be damaged because of you parking a truck, like let's just say you have a dump truck, you park a dump truck on top of your sewer line, you might crack the system. Kind of silly. Driveways are usually where people run into problems. So like if you run a driveway over top of it, and then let's just say you run a landscaping company and you've got a bunch of heavy equipment and you're constantly going over the sewer line, that can cause some headaches for you. With this, it's almost always installation error. The second most common cause of issues for an inspection is going to be the piping. And that leads us to our final and third thing that happens. That is going to be the distribution box. Now, the distribution box is a little tiny box that separates the water into each of your drain lines. Sometimes you might have a drain field. Sometimes you might have a dry well. You could have a variety of systems. They come in a variety of flavors and shapes, but a distribution box is pretty universal at least in our area. You might get serial distribution, but nobody really does that anymore. So when you have a septic system, you're going to have your tank that clarifies your liquid. Now you have the pipe that goes to the distribution box, and then the box will ideally put all of the water equally into each of the drain lines. So if you have 2 drain fields and you have 100 gallons of water in, 50 should go to one, 50 should go to the other. The same issue we run into with baffles is the same issue we run into with distribution boxes. Sewer gas is really corrosive, and a lot of those distribution boxes, the ventilation's not that great. The water just kind of sits in there and everything just kind of ferments and stagnates, and eventually those walls will get super weak. Distribution box walls are significantly thinner than a septic tank, so it doesn't take as long for those walls to deteriorate, degrade, and eventually collapse. The problem with a collapsing distribution box is once it's obstructed, guess what? Flow of water is not going to go through your system, and you're going to end up with a backup, or worse, surfacing sewage. That's never fun, especially if that backup works its way back into your house. This is why, again, it's very important to make sure you're not putting trees over top of your septic system, because that happens all the time. In summary, our 3 main issues if you're going to have a house that's less than 20 years old, it's almost always baffles, pipes, distribution boxes. If you're getting a permit pulled or a septic inspection for a real estate purchase, expect one of those 3 items to become a problem. You might be lucky and never have that issue. You might be unlucky and I could ruin your day. Hopefully you found this useful. If you did, you know what to do. Hit that like button, hit subscribe, and go ahead and leave a comment down below. Did you have your system inspected when you bought your house? Let's talk about it. Till next time, guys.